The soft hum of the ceiling fan filled the quiet kitchen as Eleanor stirred a pot of soup. Outside, the muffled rumble of motorcycles and laughter echoed in the distance. It was just another night in their modest home on the outskirts of the city, or so it seemed. To Jack, Elena was just his quiet, obedient wife, the type who wouldn't dare question his authority or his dangerous lifestyle. But Jack had no idea who Eleanor truly was. Jack barged through the door, his leather jacket smeared with dirt and his knuckles bruised. He tossed his keys onto the table with a clatter. "Eleanor!" he called, his voice rough. "Where's my dinner?" "Almost ready," Elena replied softly, glancing at him with a calm smile. She moved with practiced grace, her demeanor serene, almost submissive. Jack grunted, flopping onto the couch. To him, Elena was a nobody, but beneath her composed exterior, a whirlwind of thoughts churned. Jack had no idea who she truly was, or what she was planning. As Jack flipped through channels on the TV, Elena's phone buzzed on the counter. She casually picked it up, making sure her back was to him. The message was short but clear. Target acquired. Elena typed back quickly, her fingers steady. Proceed as planned. Report back at 2 a.m. Then she slid the phone into her pocket and returned to her cooking. Jack was oblivious. To him, Elena was weak and uninvolved. But to the Vipers, she was their leader, a strategic mastermind known as the Fox. The gang's rise to power had shaken the criminal underworld, but no one knew the face behind the movement. And that was just how Elena intended to keep it. The facade wasn't just for Jack's sake. Eleanor needed him to believe she was weak, uninvolved, and incapable of anything significant. Her marriage to him had been a calculated move, a way to infiltrate the Black Fangs from within. Years ago, the Black Fangs had destroyed her family, leaving her orphaned and vowing revenge. Every step she'd taken since had been part of a long game, one she had no intention of losing. "Rough night?" Elena asked, setting a bowl of soup in front of Jack. "Nothing I can't handle," Jack muttered, slurping loudly. "Some punk kids tried to mess with our stash. Took care of it, though." He grinned, leaning back in his chair. "I told them. Nobody messes with the Black Fangs." Elena's stomach churned. The arrogance, the entitlement. Jack had no idea that the punk kids were part of her crew, testing the Black Fangs' defenses. They had reported back to her hours ago, detailing every weak point they'd exploited. Jack wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "You wouldn't understand, though. This world's too rough for someone like you." "Of course," Elena said, nodding demurely. Inside, her resolve hardened. Jack thought she was fragile and incapable of understanding the violence and power struggles that ruled his world. He had no idea she had orchestrated half of the chaos he complained about. Later that night, Elena slipped out of bed while Jack snored loudly. She pulled on a hoodie and quietly exited the house, her movements practiced and silent. A black car waited for her at the end of the street. She climbed in, and the driver nodded. "Everything's ready, boss." Elena leaned back, her calm exterior replaced by a steely determination. "Good. Let's finish this." A black SUV was waiting down the street, its engine purring softly. Inside sat two of Elena's most trusted lieutenants, both dressed inconspicuously but exuding an air of authority. "Everything's set," one of them said as Elena slid into the back seat. "The docks are clear. We moved the shipment before their crew even noticed." "Good," Elena replied, her voice steady. "Keep it clean. No unnecessary noise." "What about him?" the second lieutenant asked, glancing towards the house. Elena hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Not yet. He's still useful." The SUV rolled away, disappearing into the shadows of the city. Elena leaned back in her seat, her mind racing. Every day, she walked a fine line between her dual lives. One misstep could expose everything, but the risk was worth it. The Black Fangs had taken everything from her, and she wouldn't stop until she dismantled them piece by piece. The next morning, Jack was already gone when Elena woke up. She found a note on the kitchen counter. Be back late. Don't wait up. It was just as well. Elena had her own plans for the day. She headed downtown, blending effortlessly into the crowd. Her destination was a small coffee shop that served as a front for the Vipers. In the back room, a large map of the city was spread out on a table, dotted with pins and markers. Eleanor's lieutenant greeted her. We've got new intel on the Black Fangs. They're planning a deal at the old factory tonight. Perfect, Eleanor said, her eyes scanning the map. Let's make sure they leave empty-handed. As the team strategized, Elena felt a flicker of satisfaction. The Black Fangs had no idea what was coming. And Jack, poor, oblivious Jack, was about to find out just how strong his weak wife really was. The day passed uneventfully, at least, on the surface. Eleanor went about her errands, exchanging polite smiles with neighbors and acting every bit the devoted housewife. By evening, she was back in the kitchen, preparing dinner as usual. When Jack came home, he was in a foul mood. Something wrong? Elena asked, keeping her tone light. Someone's screwing with us, Jack growled, slamming a beer bottle onto the counter. We had a whole shipment disappear last night. No trace. Nothing. Elena feigned surprise. That's terrible. Do you think it's another gang? Probably, Jack muttered. But whoever it is, they've got guts. I'll give them that. Eleanor turned away, hiding her smile. If only he knew. The evening sun cast long shadows over the city as Jack swaggered into the dingy Black Fangs clubhouse. His crew was already there, sprawled across threadbare couches and crates. A low hum of tension filled the room, broken only by the occasional clink of beer bottles or the snap of a lighter. Jack thrived in this environment, the chaos, the danger, the sense of control. But tonight, something felt off. Listen up, Jack barked, grabbing the attention of his crew. We've got a problem. Someone's hitting our shipments, and I want to know who. Tonight we're hitting back, no mercy, the crew nodded, their expressions grim. But as Jack laid out his plan, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Meanwhile, Eleanor stood in the shadows outside the clubhouse, her phone pressed to her ear. They're moving tonight, she whispered. Be ready. Her lieutenant's voice crackled through the line. Understood. We'll be waiting. Elena slipped her phone back into her pocket and melted into the night. The game was far from over, and she was always one step ahead. Loyalty in the Black Fangs was won by brute, strength and intimidation. Jack stood at the center of the dingy clubhouse, his presence commanding the room's attention. Listen up, he barked. Someone's been screwing with us. Stolen shipments, ambushes. This stops now. We're hitting back. The men nodded. There. Loyalty unquestionable, even if their competence wasn't. Jack's second-in-command, Ronnie, leaned forward. You got a plan, boss? Jack smirked. Yeah, we're going straight to the docks tonight. Whoever's behind this won't see us coming. At home. Elena sat by the window, the faint buzz of Jack's motorcycle fading into the distance. She glanced at her phone. A secure text message had just come in. Intel confirmed. Black Fangs heading to the docks. Orders? Elena hesitated for a moment. Jack was reckless, sure, but he was predictable. His impulsive decisions were her greatest weapon. She typed her response. Proceed. Minimal confrontation. Leave no traces. Tonight's operation wasn't about fighting. It was about sending a message. The Vipers had built their reputation on precision and discipline, qualities the Black Fangs lacked entirely. Elena knew Jack wouldn't understand the subtlety of her plan. He would see the empty docks and assume his rivals had outmaneuvered him yet again. But Jack wasn't the only problem. His recklessness had a ripple effect, and tonight, those ripples threatened to disrupt Elena's carefully constructed web. The Black Fangs arrived at the docks under the cover of night, their motorcycles rumbling like a storm rolling in. Jack, dismounted with confidence, his leather boots crunching against the gravel. Fan out! he ordered, his voice sharp. "If they're here, I want to know about it." The crew spread out, their flashlights sweeping over shipping containers and abandoned warehouses. But the docks were silent, save for the distant lapping of water against the pier. "This doesn't feel right," Ronnie muttered, sticking close to Jack. "It's too quiet," Jack sneered. "That's because we scared them off. Cowards." But even as he spoke, doubt flickered in his eyes. Jack wasn't smart, but he wasn't stupid either. Something about the scene didn't sit well with him. Suddenly, a burst of light illuminated the docks. A flare shot up into the sky, its red glow casting eerie shadows over the containers. The Black Fangs froze, their instincts kicking in. But it was too late. From the shadows emerged figures clad in black, their movements swift and deliberate. The Vipers. They moved like ghosts, silent and efficient, surrounding the Black Fangs without a word. Jack's hand instinctively went to his weapon, but before he could react, a voice cut through the tension. "Drop it, Jack." Elena stepped into the light, her hood pulled low, her face partially obscured. But Jack would recognize that voice anywhere. His eyes widened in disbelief. "Elena, what the hell are you doing here?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she raised a hand, signaling her crew to hold their positions. "You've been playing a dangerous game, Jack. But tonight, the game ends." Jack's confusion turned to anger. "You're behind this. You've been screwing with us this whole time." Elena's expression remained calm, almost pitying. "You took everything from me, Jack. My family, my life. Did you really think I'd just sit back and let you get away with it?" The realization hit Jack like a punch to the gut. All this time, he had underestimated her. The quiet, obedient wife he thought he knew was nothing more than a facade. The Vipers closed in, their presence overwhelming. Jack's crew, outnumbered and outmaneuvered, had no choice but to surrender. As the Black Fangs were disarmed and led away, Jack glared at Eleanor. "You think this is over? You think you've won?" Eleanor stepped closer, her voice low but firm. "This was never about winning, Jack. It was about justice. And tonight, justice is served." With that, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows once more. The docks fell silent again, the red flare fading into the night. From the shadows, figures dressed in dark clothing emerged, their movements swift and calculated. Jack roared, drawing his weapon, but it was over before it began. The figures didn't attack. Instead, they moved through the group with precision, planting devices on the Black Fang's vehicles. Within minutes, the sound of engines roared, again, but not from the Black Fangs. The mysterious intruders disappeared into the night, leaving only silence in their wake. Jack cursed, kicking a crate in frustration. What the hell was that? Ronnie examined one of the devices left behind. A small tracker. "They're not trying to kill us," he said, his voice uneasy. "They're tracking us." Jack's jaw tightened. He didn't like being outsmarted, and it was happening far too often for his liking. Meanwhile, Elena watched the operation unfold through a live feed on her phone. Her Lieutenant Ava sat beside her in their hidden headquarters, a converted warehouse filled with maps, monitors, and weapons. "They'll figure out the tracker soon," Ava said, sipping her coffee. "Was it worth the risk?" Elena nodded. "We don't need their bikes. We need their patterns. Jack's crew will lead us straight to their supply chain." Ava raised an eyebrow. "And your husband?" Eleanor's expression darkened. "He'll be fine, until he isn't." Back at the Black Fangs clubhouse, Jack's temper was at a boiling point. He paced the room, barking orders and hurling insults at his crew. "We're being hunted," he snapped, "and you idiots can't even protect a shipment, let alone figure out who's behind it." Ronnie spoke cautiously, knowing the wrong word could set Jack off. "Whoever this is, they're playing a long game. They're not just hitting random spots. They're dismantling us piece by piece." Jack slammed his fist on the table. "Then we stop playing defense." No more waiting around for them to make the next move. We hit every gang in the city until someone talks. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Even for the Black Fangs, this was a risky move. But no one dared to question Jack, not openly at least. That night, Elena returned home to find Jack already there, nursing a drink at the kitchen table. His face was tense, his usual swagger replaced with frustration. "You're home early," she remarked, keeping her tone light. "Bad night," he muttered. "Some punks tried to pull one over on us." Elena sat across from him, feigning concern. "Are you okay?" Jack scoffed. "Of course I'm okay, but they won't be when I'm done with them." For a moment, Elena felt a pang of guilt. Jack wasn't an evil man, just an impulsive, arrogant one. But he had chosen his path, and now he would face the consequences. "Be careful," she said softly. "You can't trust anyone out there." Jack looked at her, his expression softening. "You don't have to worry about me, Elena. I know what I'm doing." But he didn't, and that was the problem. As Jack stormed off to bed, Elena stayed in the kitchen, staring at the moonlight streaming through the window. Her phone buzzed with another update. Tracker shows movement. Targets heading west. Awaiting instructions. Elena typed her response. "Let them lead us to the next target. No mistakes this time." Elena typed her response without hesitation. "Do not engage. Observe only." She couldn't afford to make mistakes. The Black Fangs were already unraveling, and Jack's desperation was speeding up the process. But Elena knew better than to get complacent. Jack was reckless, but even a cornered animal could be dangerous. Her plan was working too well, perhaps too fast. The Black Fangs were crumbling faster than she'd anticipated, and Jack was starting to notice the cracks in her facade. He wasn't smart enough to figure it out yet, but she couldn't take any chances. The road ahead was fraught with danger, but Eleanor was ready. She had to be. Because the game wasn't over. Not yet. The air in the Black Fangs clubhouse was thick with tension. Jack sat at the head of the battered table, his hands gripping the arms of his chair so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Around him, his crew looked equally uneasy, stealing glances at one another but avoiding his gaze. "I'm done waiting," Jack growled, breaking the silence. "We've been hit too many times. Whoever's messing with us knows what they're doing, and I'll be damned if I let them keep this up." Ronnie, always cautious, leaned forward. "What do you want us to do, boss?" "We don't even know who's behind it yet." Jack's eyes narrowed. "That's where you're wrong. We might not have a name, but we've got patterns. These attacks, they're too coordinated. Someone's feeding them intel." The room fell silent. Jack's suspicion of a mole was new, and it immediately put everyone on edge. "You think someone's talking?" one of the younger crew members asked hesitantly. "I don't think," Jack snapped. "I know, and until we find out who it is, none of you are off the hook." At home, Elena sat at the kitchen table, her phone resting, within arm's reach. She was reading through the latest reports from her lieutenants. The trackers placed on the Black Fangs bikes had revealed the locations of several key hideouts and safe houses. Eleanor's crew had already begun planning their next move, but she knew they needed to be careful. Jack was growing more paranoid by the day, and the wrong step could blow her cover. The front door slammed, startling her. Jack stomped into the house, his expression dark and brooding. Elena glanced up from her book, masking her surprise with a practiced smile. "You're home. Early," she said, setting her book aside. "Meeting didn't go well," Jack muttered, heading straight for the fridge. He grabbed a beer and popped the cap off with the edge of the counter, taking a long swig before slamming the bottle down. "Anything I can do?" Elena asked, keeping her tone light. Jack eyed her for a moment, as if considering whether to say something. Then he shook his head and turned away. "Just a bad night. Don't worry about it." Eleanor watched him carefully, her mind racing. Jack's paranoia was growing, and it was only a matter of time before he started connecting the dots. She needed to stay one step ahead. Later that night, as Jack slept, Elena slipped out of bed and made her way to the living room. She pulled out her phone and sent a quick message to Ava. "Accelerate the plan. We need to move before Jack figures it out. Ava's response came almost immediately. Understood. We'll be ready. Elena stared out the window, the city lights flickering in the distance. The game was entering its final stages, and she couldn't afford to falter now. Later that night, as Jack slept, Elena slipped out of bed and into the living room. Her phone buzzed with another update. Targets confirmed. Warehouse on 8th Street. Shipment inbound. Orders? Elena hesitated for a moment. The warehouse was a significant hub for the Black Fangs, and hitting it would be a major blow to their operations, but it was also a risky move. If Jack caught wind of her involvement, everything she'd worked for would crumble. Proceed with caution, she typed back. No casualties. Leave them guessing. The Vipers had built their reputation on precision and discipline, qualities the Black Fangs sorely lacked. Elena knew that another successful operation would frustrate Jack further, pushing him closer to making a critical mistake. The following evening, Jack was unusually quiet at dinner. He poked at his food, barely eating, his mind clearly elsewhere. Elena could feel the tension radiating off him like heat from a flame. "You seem distracted," she said, breaking the silence. Jack looked up at her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Just thinking. There's a lot going on right now." "Anything you want to talk about?" Elena offered, keeping her tone casual. Jack shook, his head, but his gaze lingered on her for a moment too long. "Nah, it's not your problem." Elena forced a smile, but her heart raced. Jack was suspicious. She could feel it. And while she doubted he had any concrete evidence, his paranoia was enough to make her tread even more carefully. At the same time, Jack was struggling to piece together the puzzle. He had always prided himself on his instincts, and something about Elena had started to feel off. She was too calm, too composed, even as the Black Fangs faced one setback after another. And then there were the little things. The late-night phone calls she claimed were from friends, the times he'd caught her studying him out of the corner of her eye. It didn't make sense. Eleanor was just his wife, wasn't she? She wasn't involved in his world, didn't even ask questions about his work. But that was the problem. She was too uninvolved. Most women, even ones who weren't part of the gang, would at least show some curiosity. But Eleanor acted as if she didn't care at all. That night, as Elena slept, Jack quietly got out of bed. He grabbed her phone from the kitchen counter, careful not to wake her. The screen was locked, of course, but Jack wasn't a complete idiot. He had seen her unlock it before and remembered the pattern she used. The phone opened, and Jack's heart pounded as he scrolled through her messages. Most of them were harmless, chats with friends, reminders, and shopping lists. But then, he found something strange. A thread with no name attached, just a number. The messages were vague, filled with phrases like, "Target confirmed and proceed with caution." Jack's stomach dropped. He didn't understand everything he was reading, but one thing was clear. Elena wasn't who she claimed to be. Jack muttered under his breath as he stared at the cryptic messages on Elena's phone. Target acquired, awaiting instructions. What the hell is this? The next morning, Elena woke to find Jack already gone. He had left another note on the counter. "Don't wait up. Work stuff." But something about the way he left felt different. His movements had been sharper, his tone more clipped. Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that he was onto something. Her phone buzzed with a new message. Warehouse hit successful. No casualties. Shipment secured. Eleanor smiled slightly. Another victory. But her satisfaction was short-lived. She had a feeling that the calm wouldn't last. At the Black Fang's hideout, Jack stood in the middle of the room, his phone in one hand and a bottle of whiskey in the other. He had copied the messages from Elena's phone, forwarding them to himself for later review. "Ronnie," he said, his voice low, "I need you to do something for me." "What's up, boss?" "I need you to track down a number," Jack said, handing him the phone. Find out who it belongs to. Ronnie hesitated. You think it's connected to the hits? Jack's jaw tightened. Just do it. That night, Eleanor received another message from her crew. Black Fangs regrouping. Possible retaliation incoming. She typed back quickly, monitor only, no engagement. But even as she sent the message, her instincts screamed that something had shifted. Jack was acting differently, watching her more closely, asking subtle but pointed questions. And now, with the Black Fangs starting to regroup, the stakes were higher than ever. Elena knew she couldn't afford a single mistake. Jack's paranoia was like a storm on the horizon, and she could feel the winds beginning to shift. The game was getting more dangerous, and the line between her two lives was becoming increasingly blurred. But Elena wasn't about to back down, not yet. She had come too far, sacrificed too much, to let it all fall apart now. The Black Fangs were crumbling, and Jack's world was beginning to collapse around him. The only question was, how much longer could she keep him in the dark? The tension in the Black Fangs clubhouse had reached a boiling point. Jack's crew, normally rowdy and boisterous, sat in uneasy silence as their leader stormed through the room. He was a man possessed, his mind racing with suspicions he couldn't yet confirm. I don't trust any of you, Jack growled, slamming his fist onto the table. The sound reverberated through the room, making several gang members flinch. Someone's been feeding our enemies information, and until I find out who it is, you're all suspects. Ronnie shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Boss, maybe it's not one of us. Maybe it's someone on the outside. Don't you think I've considered that? Jack snapped, cutting him off. Whoever it is, they know too much. They're hitting us where it hurts, and they're always one step ahead. That doesn't happen by accident. The truth was, Jack's mind wasn't just on his crew. A nagging thought had been eating away at him since he found those messages on Elena's phone. He hadn't confronted her yet. He wasn't sure why. Maybe he didn't want to believe it, or maybe he was afraid of what he'd find if he dug too deep. At home, Elena was calm as ever, preparing dinner while keeping a close eye on her phone. Her crew's latest update had been promising. Another Black Fangs operation disrupted, with minimal risk to the Vipers. But Elena wasn't celebrating. She could sense Jack's growing paranoia, and it was only a matter of time before he started looking in her direction. She heard the front door open and braced herself. Jack entered, his expression dark, his movements sharp. He dropped his keys on the counter and stood there for a moment, watching her. You're quiet tonight, Elena said, breaking the silence. Yeah, Jack replied, his tone clipped. A lot on my mind. Anything you want to talk about? She offered, keeping her tone light. Jack didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked over to the table and sat down, his eyes never leaving hers. You've been acting different lately, he said slowly. Like you're hiding something. Elena's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her expression neutral. Different how? I don't know, Jack said, leaning back in his chair. You're just too calm, like nothing bothers you. Even with everything going on, Elena forced a laugh. I'm just trying to keep things normal. For us. Jack studied her for a long moment, his gaze piercing. Then he stood up, his voice low and dangerous. I hope that's all it is, Elena, because if I find out you've been lying to me, there's no coming back from that. Jack shook his head, but his gaze lingered on Eleanor for a moment too long. Just work stuff, he muttered. Eleanor turned back to the stove, hiding her unease. She could feel his eyes on her, like he was searching for something just out of reach. She needed to redirect his focus, and fast. Dinner's almost ready, she said, forcing a smile. How about a beer while you wait? Jack grunted in agreement, taking a seat at the table. But as he watched Elena move around the kitchen, his suspicion only deepened. Something about her felt off, too calm, too collected. And those messages, he still couldn't make sense of them, but they didn't sit right with him. Meanwhile, at the Viper headquarters, Eleanor's second-in-command, Ava, was growing impatient. "We can't keep waiting, Elena," Ava said, pacing the room. "Jack's gang is on its last legs. One big push, and we can take them out for good." Elena shook her head. "It's not the right time. If we move too fast, we risk exposure. Jack's already suspicious. I can't give him any reason to dig deeper." "He's not an idiot," Ava argued. "And if he figures out who I am, he won't," Elena interrupted, her voice firm. "Not if we stay careful." Ava sighed but didn't press further. She trusted Elena's judgment, even if she didn't always agree with it. "We've got eyes on their warehouse," Ava said after a moment. "It's lightly guarded. We could hit it tonight. Send a message." Elena considered this. A direct hit on the warehouse would throw the Black Fang's operations into chaos, but it would also draw attention, especially from Jack. Still, it might be worth the risk. "Do it," Elena said finally. "But keep it clean. No casualties." That night, Jack's suspicions reached a breaking point. He waited until Elena was asleep, then slipped out of bed and into the living room. Her phone was on the counter, just like before. He unlocked it using the pattern he'd memorized and opened the messaging app. This time, the messages were even more incriminating. "Warehouse hit confirmed. No casualties. Awaiting further orders." Jack's blood ran cold. Warehouse hit. No casualties. It didn't take a genius to figure out what was going on. Someone had hit the Black Fang's warehouse earlier that night. And now he had proof that Eleanor was involved. But how? Why? None of it made sense. Eleanor wasn't part of this world. She didn't know anything about gangs or turf wars, or at least that's what he'd always believed. Jack put the phone down, his mind racing. He needed answers, and he needed them now. The next morning, Elena woke to find Jack already gone. His side of the bed was cold, and there was no note on the counter. It wasn't unusual for him to leave early, but something about it felt different. She checked her phone and found a message from Ava. "Warehouse clear. No sign of retaliation." Elena's relief was short-lived. She knew Jack better than anyone, and his absence this morning wasn't a coincidence. He was onto her. Elena typed back, "Good. Keep monitoring." But even as she sent the message, her instincts screamed that something was wrong. Jack was unpredictable, and if he'd found any evidence of her involvement, there was no telling what he might do. At the Black Fang's clubhouse, Jack was waiting for Ronnie to arrive. When his second-in-command walked in, Jack wasted no time. "I need you to follow someone," Jack said, his tone deadly serious. Ronnie frowned. "Who?" Jack hesitated. For a moment, then said, "Eleanor." Ronnie's eyes widened in surprise. "Your wife?" "Just do it," Jack snapped. "And don't tell anyone." Ronnie nodded, though he clearly didn't like the idea. He had no reason to suspect Elena of anything, but he wasn't about to question Jack when he was in one of his moods. Later that day, Eleanor received another update from her crew, Black Fang's regrouping, possible retaliation in the works. She sighed, knowing that Jack's desperation would only make him more dangerous. She needed to stay ahead of him, but the walls were starting to close in. That evening, as she prepared dinner, she noticed Jack, watching her again. His gaze was intense, calculating, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle. "Everything okay?" Eleanor asked, feigning innocence. "Yeah," Jack said, though his tone said otherwise. "Just thinking about work." "Work?" Jack nodded slowly. "Yeah, work." As the evening wore on, Jack grew increasingly restless. Finally, he grabbed his keys and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Elena asked. "Out," Jack replied curtly. "Don't. Wait up." Elena watched him leave, her heart pounding. Something was definitely wrong. Jack was acting erratic, and she had no idea what he was planning. What Eleanor didn't know was that Jack had set a trap. He'd given Ronnie strict instructions to tail her, to see where she went and who she met with. If Eleanor was hiding something, Jack was determined to find out. But as Jack waited for Ronnie's report, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the brink of discovering something he might not be ready to face. The night was quiet, save for the hum of streetlights and the distant sound of a siren. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, staring at her phone, her brow furrowed in thought. Something was wrong. Jack's behavior had been erratic, his questions sharper, more calculated. It was as if he were trying to pull at the threads of her carefully woven facade. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. A message from Ava lit up the screen. New intel. Black Fangs regrouping at the docks. Possible strike incoming. Elena's fingers hovered over the keypad. She couldn't afford to let them gain ground. Monitor closely, she replied. Do not engage until further notice. But even as she sent the message, a wave of unease settled over her. She'd spent years perfecting her double life, but Jack's growing suspicion threatened to unravel everything. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the city, Ronnie trailed Elena. Jack's orders had been clear. Follow her, see where she goes, and report back. Ronnie didn't like spying on the boss's wife, but loyalty to Jack overrode his discomfort. It didn't take long for Ronnie to see that Elena's evening errands weren't as innocent as they seemed. She wasn't just running to the store or meeting friends. Instead, she headed toward a nondescript warehouse on the edge of town, the same warehouse the Vipers were rumored to operate out of. Ronnie parked his bike a safe distance away and watched as Eleanor entered through a side door. His stomach twisted. She wasn't just wandering into the wrong place by accident. She knew exactly what she was doing. Grabbing his phone, Ronnie took a quick photo and sent it to Jack with a single message. You're not going to like this. Back at the Black Fangs clubhouse, Jack stared at the photo in disbelief. His worst fears were confirmed. Elena wasn't just connected to their enemies, she was deeply involved. His mind raced as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Jack's mind raced with questions. How long had she been playing him? What else had she done? And most importantly, why? Fueled by a volatile mix of anger and betrayal, Jack grabbed his gun and stormed out, ignoring Ronnie's advice to wait and gather more information. He wasn't about to sit around while the woman he thought he knew made a fool of him. Inside the warehouse, Elena stood at the head of a table, surrounded by her most trusted lieutenants. Maps and documents were spread out in front of them, detailing the Black Fang's dwindling operations. We need to keep the pressure on, Ava said, pointing to a marked location on the map. Their main supply line runs through here. If we cut it off, they're done. Elena nodded, her mind already calculating the next move. Agreed. But we need to be careful. Jack's growing desperate. Desperation makes people unpredictable. Ava smirked. Desperate or not, they're no match for us. The door to the warehouse slammed open, cutting through the conversation like a gunshot. Elena's heart stopped as she looked up to see Jack standing in the doorway, his gun drawn. His face was a storm of rage and betrayal. You! He spat, pointing. What, the gun at her? It's been you all along. The room froze. The Vipers reached for their weapons, but Eleanor held up a hand, signaling them to stand down. Jack, she said calmly, taking a step forward. Put the gun down. We can talk about this. Talk? Jack laughed bitterly, his grip on the gun tightening. You've been lying to me for years, playing the perfect wife while stabbing me in the back. You think I want to talk? Elena's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. It's not what you think. Oh, it's exactly what I think, Jack snarled. You're the reason my crew's been falling apart. You're the one who's been feeding the Vipers information, aren't you? Elena took another step forward, her hands raised. Yes, Jack, I am. But it's more complicated than that. Jack's laugh was hollow. Complicated? You've been working with a gang that's been tearing mine apart. What's complicated about that? Eleanor hesitated, knowing this was the moment she'd been dreading. I didn't just work with the Vipers, she said, her voice soft but firm. I am the Vipers. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Jack's eyes widened in shock, and, for a moment, his hand wavered. He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. You're lying, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. I'm not, Eleanor replied. I've been their leader from the beginning. Everything I've done has been to take down the Black Fangs. Why? Jack demanded. What did I ever do to you? Elena's eyes flashed with anger. You don't even remember, do you? Your gang destroyed my family, Jack. My parents were killed because of your crew's greed and violence. I've spent every day since making sure the Black Fangs would pay for what they did. Jack's face twisted in disbelief. That was years ago. You didn't even know me then, Elena said, her voice rising. But you're part of it now. You've spent your life terrorizing people, taking what you want without caring about the consequences. Someone had to stop you. For a moment, Jack said nothing. The weight of her words sank in, but the rage in his eyes didn't fade. Instead, he aimed the gun at her again. You think this makes you better than me? He hissed. You're just like me, a liar, a manipulator. You're no saint, Elena. Elena's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. Maybe I'm not, but I've spent my life protecting people from men like you. The standoff felt like it lasted forever. Then, from behind, Jack, Ava appeared, her weapon drawn. Put the gun down, Jack, she said coldly. This is her turf now, not yours. Jack's eyes flicked to Ava, then back to Elena. Slowly, reluctantly, he lowered his weapon. This isn't over, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Not by a long shot. Elena held his gaze, her expression unyielding. Yes, Jack, it is. The Black Fangs are done. You can either accept that and walk away, or you can keep fighting and lose everything. For a moment, Jack looked like he might argue, but then he turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The warehouse was silent for a moment before Ava spoke. What now? Elena took a deep breath, steadying herself. Now we finish what we started. The Black Fangs are still dangerous, and Jack won't go quietly. But we've come too far to stop now. The silence in the warehouse after Jack's departure was deafening. Eleanor stood in the center of the room, her hands trembling slightly as the weight of the confrontation settled on her. Jack knew the truth now, and his anger was a storm waiting to break. She had prepared for this moment for years, but she couldn't shake the pang of regret that twisted in her chest. Ava approached her cautiously. He's not going to back down, she said, her voice low. You know that, right? I know, Elena replied, her tone steely. He'll come for us, for me, and when he does, we'll be ready. Her crew exchanged uneasy glances. Jack's reputation for recklessness and brutality preceded him. But this time, desperation would make him even more dangerous. Elena knew that all too well. Meanwhile, Jack was back at the Black Fang's hideout, pacing furiously. The room was in disarray. Overturned chairs, shattered bottles, the remnants of his rage. His crew watched him warily, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. We're hitting them tonight, Jack finally growled, his voice sharp and unforgiving. No more waiting, no more games. We take the Vipers out and we take her out, Ronnie began hesitantly. Are you sure that's the right move? She's got the upper hand. Her crew's bigger, smarter. Jack slammed his fist on the table. I don't care. She lied to me, played me like a fool. Do you think I'm going to let her get away with that? Ronnie fell silent, his reluctance clear. Jack's plan was suicide, but no one dared to say it, aloud. Back at the warehouse, Elena and her team worked quickly to fortify their position. Surveillance feeds flickered across the monitors, showing the Black Fangs gearing up for an attack. They're moving, Ava reported, her eyes fixed on the screen. Looks like they're heading for the docks first, trying to draw us out. Eleanor shook her head. We're not falling for it. They want to spread us thin, but we'll hold our ground. She turned to the rest of the crew. The Black Fangs are desperate. They'll come at us with everything they've got. Stay focused. Stick to the plan, and we'll finish this. The room buzzed with quiet determination. The Vipers had risen to power under Elena's leadership, not just because of their strength, but because of their discipline. They trusted her, and tonight, that trust would be tested like never before. As the Black Fangs closed in, the tension in the city was palpable. Jack led his crew with a manic energy, his focus fixed on one thing: revenge. He didn't care about collateral damage, didn't care about the consequences. All that mattered was taking Eleanor down. But even as they neared their target, doubt nagged at him. Her words echoed in his mind. You don't even remember, do you? Jack didn't remember much from those early days of the Black Fangs. Back then, it had been about survival, not power. Had his actions really destroyed her family? Was he the monster she claimed he was? He shook the thoughts away. There was no room for doubt now. Elena watched the monitors as Jack's crew approached. She could see the recklessness in their movements, the cracks in their unity. They were running on anger and adrenaline, while her crew was prepared and focused. They're splitting up, Ava observed. 2 groups, one heading for the docks, the other straight for us. Good, Eleanor said. Let them spread themselves thin. Take the docks team out quietly. The rest will come to us. Ava nodded, signaling a small team to intercept the group at the docks. Meanwhile, Eleanor stayed in the warehouse, her focus on the main assault. The minutes ticked by like hours as the Black Fangs drew closer. Elena's heart pounded, but she kept her expression calm. This was it. The culmination of everything she had worked for. One final stand to end the war for good. The attack came suddenly, with a deafening roar of engines and the shouts of men. The Black Fangs stormed the warehouse, their weapons raised, their intent clear. But the Vipers were ready. Eleanor's crew moved with precision, using the fortified positions and traps they had set up in advance. Smoke filled the air as flashbangs disoriented the attackers, and one by one, the Black Fangs fell back under the onslaught. Jack pushed through the chaos, his eyes locked on Elena. He didn't care about the gunfire, the smoke, or the shouts of his crew. All he cared about was reaching her. He found her near the center of the warehouse, standing tall amidst the chaos. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned with defiance. "This ends now, Jack," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "Call off your men and walk away." "Walk away," Jack sneered. "After everything you've done? You destroyed my crew, my life. You think I'm just going to let that go? You destroyed your crew, Jack," Elena shot back. "Your greed, your recklessness. That's what brought you here. I just sped up the process." Jack raised his gun, his hands shaking. "You don't get to play the hero, Elena. You're no better than me." "Maybe not," she admitted. "But at least I'm fighting for something bigger than myself." For a moment, neither of them moved. The sounds of the battle around them faded, leaving only the two of them locked in a deadly standoff. A shot rang out, breaking the tension. Jack staggered, his gun falling from his hand as he clutched his shoulder. Behind him, Ronnie lowered his weapon, his face grim. "Sorry, boss," Ronnie said, "but this has gone too far." Jack fell to his knees, his strength finally failing him. Elena stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "It's over, Jack," she said quietly. "The Black Fangs are done." Jack looked up at her, his face a mixture of anger and defeat. "You think this makes you the winner? You're just as broken as the rest of us." "Maybe," Eleanor said, turning away, "but at least I'm still standing." As the dust settled, the remaining Black Fangs surrendered, their will to fight gone. The Iamate Vipers secured the warehouse, their victory complete. But for Elena, the moment was bittersweet. She had won the war, but at a cost she couldn't fully measure. Ava approached her, a small smile on her face. "It's done. They're finished." Eleanor nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She looked at Jack, now being helped to his feet by Ronnie, and felt the pang of something she couldn't quite name, pity, regret, she didn't know. For now, she had a city to rebuild and a future to shape. The battle was over,